What's up, everybody? This is Frank from Fam Sports New York, and today we are going to be talking about our Section 1AA team previews for the season. And I want to welcome our audience to the show. I really do appreciate you guys joining. We're going to be kind of breaking down or going over all the different programs for Section 1AA. I do have a couple announcements before we dive into the video. The first thing is about the content. If you're new here, I'm going to be giving a brief overview of the programs. I've reached out to a whole bunch of coaches. Didn't get to talk to all of them, but had some conversations. We're going to be breaking down some of the players to watch and stuff like that. And the big thing is, if I don't talk about you, doesn't mean I don't think you're going to be a good player or have a good season, but I do have a limited amount of time. And this is based on me and the conversations I've had with coaches and what I've seen on tape. The second thing I want to announce is this is week 0 coming up. We already have some games that might be played on Thursday. So we are not going to be doing game picks for week 0. Our in-season coverage starts week 1. So that's something I also wanted to address as well. And finally, because this is 1AA, I've gotten a few questions before and I wanted to kind of address this. But last year I didn't pick Carmel games, and the reason for that is I was volunteering my time to coach over at the Carmel program. My father, Mark Langella, was the defensive coordinator over at Carmel. He asked for my help, and obviously you want to go help family. We had a great season. We had the number 1 defense. We won a section title game, but we're not coaching there. Me, my father, not coaching there. I am going to be picking Carmel games like I do all the other teams, and this has never affected my coverage of 1AA, nor will anything ever affect my coverage. But I just wanted to be transparent with you guys because, when you come here, being fair, being honest is something that I take pride in with you guys, and I like to bring that covering all the teams. So with that, let's dive into the teams. And there's no specific order here, but there's 14 total teams in 1AA, broken up into 2 7-team leagues, League A and League B. And I'm going to start with League A. And the first team up is Suffern. So the first team, we talk about Suffern, coached by Dan Mueller. And last year they went 5-4. They didn't make the playoffs, but they had a pretty strong team. In the last 2 years, they've been pretty good. They're about 11-7. Last 4 years, 23-10. They've had 4 straight winning seasons for the first time since before 2004. So Suffern has been doing a pretty good job these last few years. And looking at this year, offensively, returning 5 of 11 starters. On the offensive line, they have 2 out of the 5 offensive linemen coming back. They do bring back their quarterback in Mason Palumbo, who was a sophomore last year, so they're expecting a big growth from him this season. Defensively, they're also bringing back 5 of 11 starters. And a big thing Coach emphasized on the defensive side they want to improve on is generating more quarterback pressure and more turnovers. Like, that's kind of the big thing. On offense, they had a lot of 3-and-outs that really hurt them, and penalties. When you watch Suffern, unfortunately, a lot of penalties last year really devastated them. And when I kind of look at this team, they have a lot of competition going on in camp that Coach talked about. There's a lot of open spots that need to be filled, but they are bringing in some veterans and some talented players. And some of the players to watch out for, the first one is Brady Snell, defensive back and wide receiver, the senior. This young man was a Frank's finest as a DB. Really love the smooth athleticism that he has. He's going to be an important player in man-to-man coverage for probably some of their best wide receivers that they play this season. Another guy, Jeff Joseph, when you turn on the tape, he was a sophomore last year, junior this year. He was at the running back and defensive back spot. He did pop off on tape, and I'm expecting to see if he can get a big jump here in his junior year, he can be a difference maker for them. Cam Lou is another one, shifty guy, not a very big guy, but a shifty slot wide receiver, also playing defensive back. We know about Ben Ryan, the offensive lineman, defensive lineman, sturdy, strong guy. He's going to help lead that charge up front. I mentioned Mason Palumbo. They're really expecting a big jump from him from his sophomore and junior year. But a guy to really keep out for, Shane Stolka. Yeah, he's a junior defensive end, tight end. And I tell you what, at 6'5", 220 pounds, really solid frame. Really like the raw potential that this young man has. And then finally, Luke Bednar is another one that Coach brought up. Linebacker, fullback, offensive lineman. He rocked number 86 last year. 6'2", 200-pound, well-sized kid. And I do think Suffern has some talent at each level of its team, especially on that defensive side. So it's going to be really interesting to see Suffern this year. Could be an interesting dynamic. The next team, let's talk about RCK. Coached by Coach Hogan. Last year was a struggle, right? In 2022, they were 1-8. And they had a lot of young kids. I mean, it was a very, very young team. They had to go through a lot of growing pains, and they were bringing a bunch of them back, right? So offensively, 7 of 11 starters are returning, 3 out of the 5 on the offensive line. They are bringing their quarterback in Dean Fitzsimmons. The big focus, I mean, Coach was pretty blunt on answering some of these things on improvement on offense. They had 9 total offensive touchdowns last year. They have to get more explosive and score more points. That was a big emphasis. Defensively, 6 of 11 starters coming back. Another big emphasis is stopping the run this year. That's something that really hurt them last year that Coach is kind of emphasizing. And when you look back at this team, they had 6 sophomore starters last year, right? So to me, this is a huge opportunity to see if they're going to be a much more competitive team, which I think they will, because that growth from sophomore to junior year can be huge. I mean, 6 of them are starters. The offensive line is going to be the key factor here. To me, can they hold up into a big physical AA schools is going to be the big question. Now, some players to watch. Dean Fitzsimmons, I mentioned him at the quarterback spot, using his arm, growing with the more and more reps and the work that he's put in this summer. But a guy, James Eglett, who I think is probably their most consistent player and their best offensive player at the running back and linebacker position. He was strong. He had a solid season for them last year. They're expecting big things for him this year. Chris Thomason, linebacker and H-back, is another one Coach mentioned. Really like the work, the senior that he's put in. This is somebody to keep an eye on. And to me, I'm looking at the guys up front. Raheem Abdullah, the junior. He's a defensive end and offensive guard. Chris Shetter, he's a junior. He was on the offensive line last year, and he's also a defensive lineman. I'm interested to see this kind of jump up front. Can these guys really grow to the next step from their sophomore to junior year is going to be huge. Dylan Fay, he's a junior again. He's outside linebacker and running back number 44. Coach really liked his work as well, brought him up. And finally, Eric Waldrum. He's a wide receiver and defensive back. He's the senior, rock number 5. This is a guy who has some speed to him. I'm excited to see what he can bring to this upcoming year. And RCK is going to be interesting, right? And they had a rough year last year, bringing back a lot of guys. I think they're definitely going to be more competitive this season. The next team I want to talk about, probably the favorite, and I think deservingly so, is Arlington. Coached by Coach Marano. Last year they went 6-4. I think the season ended kind of a bit disappointing if we had some truth serum to them. They went 6-4, and again, they had a strong unit. They lost to Mamaroneck in the semifinals, had a nice win against New Rochelle in the quarters, but really got beaten up against Mamaroneck in that semis. And, there's no question that this feels like, and I do think their standards are up to the section title. I mean, they're bringing back a lot of talent to skill position, some big offensive linemen that we're going to dive into. But the question to me, there's a lot of talk about offense. I think offensively they were fine. Defensively is where I saw probably the biggest gashes that happened to them against Carmel, against Mamaroneck. They gave up some major points and some big plays. So that's going to be, to me, a big thing, is if they are going to reach the section title game and potentially win a section title game. Defensively, they have to be a lot better. I mean, offensively, I think they were good. There was things that could obviously be fixed, but I thought they were strong offensively. And I tell you what, I really like some of the talent that they got. Another thing is the running back spot. I'm interested to see how the running back spot is pursued this season. Who's going to take that? A lot of skill guys around him, but are they going to move somebody to running back or someone from the JV coming up? So we'll see on that. But let's talk about some of the players to watch in Arlington, and there's a couple that I really like. And the first one is their quarterback, right? Mike Resigno. He was a contender, senior for my Frank's Finest quarterback list. I love his build. He's 6'2", 200 pounds. He had over 1,000 yards passing last year, over 500 yards rushing, 15 touchdowns, only 4 INTs. And one thing I like about him is that I've given him constructive criticism before, but he's grown every year. And this is a young man who has great potential to hurt you both with his arm and his legs. And I do think he has the potential to really be player of the year type of caliber player. So I think a big year is up for him. Another one is James Davenport, running back and wide receiver. I love his physicality and and his versatility. He can be in the slot, he can be out wide, you can put him in the backfield. I would imagine maybe he does get some running back reps. Who knows? He plays on defense as well. But he's a big play threat for them. I think he was one of their most reliable targets last year. I expect big things. But obviously we talk about this offensive line and how they shape up, right? On the offensive line, defensive line, but I'm focusing on the offensive line. Colin Cubberly, commitment to Wisconsin. probably the best offensive lineman in the section, could be in the state. And there's not much to not like about him, but really the other guys around him. So we know about Colin, but what are the other guys going to do around him that step up for Arlington that will push them over the top? Saw him in their kind of media day talk about being 5-6 man deep, so that would be huge if those guys can get some consistency around Colin. That would be massive. Another guy, Luke Lavello, talked about him and Frank's finest defensive back. He plays the wide receiver and safety spot, solid size to him. But there's guys like Robbie Jordan, who's a slot receiver for them, shifty guy. He's coming back. They got Lucas Mockin, the senior, also another skill guy. So you've seen a bunch of skill guys, and then they got their tight end defensive end Joe McGann, who's like an additional offensive lineman there. So you can see they got some of the talent that they could be a well-balanced offense. The question is on defense, and to me, I'll give a bold prediction right now. I do think Arlington is going to be one of the 2 teams in the section finals. And again, I could be wrong. I could come back to bite me, but that's the confidence I have in the talent that is around on this Arlington team, and I do think they should be one of the favorites. Let's move to another team, a team that we know all too well has been a long history of winning, and that is New Rochelle High School, and coached by Ray Rett. Last year they went 6-4. They lost to Arlington in the quarterfinals of the playoffs, and they're also bringing back a lot of skill guys, right? So offensively, they're bringing back 5 of 11 starters, but there are some missing big pieces, which is on that offensive line where they're bringing back 2 out of 5, and the quarterback. They have to replace one of the most productive quarterbacks that New Rochelle's had in a long time in Luzzy. So those are a big question mark on the offensive side of the ball. Coach also talked about they want to be more balanced. They're obviously passing the ball a little bit more last year because of the talent that they have at the quarterback spot. They definitely want to be more balanced. Defensively, they're bringing back 8 of 11 starters. So I think they're going to have a big strength at the linebacker and defensive back positions, bringing back a lot of experience. And they're looking to create more turnovers. That's a big thing for them. So again, I'm looking at the quarterback and offensive line as big questions here. I think the strength is going to be obviously in those skill guys, and on the defensive side, those linebackers and DBs. But some of the players to watch, Coach mentioned about one quarterback who really stepped up during the summer, Andrew James. They like his athleticism. They like him being coachable. These are big things that they mentioned. And then some of the guys are Frank's finest, and that's Taylor Rett, a linebacker and tight end who had well over 100 tackles, has a really strong nose for the football, going to be so important in the middle of that defense to organize guys and to attack the football. And then we have Rastafari Anderson, another linebacker and also wide receiver. He's another very quality outside linebacker with a lot of speed to him. That linebacker core could be pretty darn dangerous for New Rochelle. Corey Dawson at the wide receiver defensive back spot, broken school records last year as the wide receiver. Obviously going to be the main target. Could see him getting a little bit more involved in the running game too, because of seeing if the quarterback position can come and how it develops. So definitely interested there. Raiden Davis was another at the running back, over 1,000 yards rushing. He was a Frank's finest a candidate as well. He had a big season for them last year. And on that offensive line, look out for a name, Christian Rome, right? He's a young guy last year. He's not super tall, but love his motor. He's got solid athleticism and feet. He's a junior this year, probably going to be important on both sides, offensive line and defensive line. Let's go to the next team, and that's Scarsdale, coached by Andy Verbois. Last year, 4-5. They lost to Carmel in the quarterfinals. This was a scrappy unit. They're got to replace some guys on that offensive and defensive line, and the big one is at their quarterback spot by one of the best athletes in the entire section last year. So really interested to see how they fill those voids, especially to me up front, right? And I do think when they played Carmel last year, you really saw the physicality of Carmel really kind of suffocate Scarsdale. How do they rebound with that and play kind of those big physical teams? They showed that they could do it against Arlington, did not do it against Carmel. Interested to see how the offensive and defensive lines shape up. But there are some interesting players that I do like on Scarsdale, and some players to watch. I didn't get to speak to coach, unfortunately, but Max Siegel, the outside linebacker, offensive lineman, solid size to him, 6'2", 195 pounds, the senior. We have Aiden Brennan, he's a tight end defensive lineman, another solid kid that I saw from last year. Camden Mattles, running back and defensive back. He's also another senior that also made some plays as a cornerback, and I'm imagining getting more and more of a role on the offensive side of the ball. And Trevor Knapp, is a guy, he was a Frank's finest defensive back, playing the running back spot, really acted like almost an additional linebacker at the safety spot, made some nice plays in the back end of the defense. I thought he was one of the better DBs, and that's why he earned that Frank's finest list. He's not a tall guy, but solid player. And another really solid player I liked was Ryan Gilligan. Right, he was an offensive lineman, defensive lineman last year. I think he's moving to linebacker, running back. 5'10", 190 pounds, and he was very active. I thought he was one of the most consistent players from that are returning for the Scarsdale team. Scarsdale's always interesting. They really are. When you look at them, they don't always have large size, but they're always scrappy and competitive. They run that certain option offense, also putting in some spread concepts as well. So interesting Scarsdale team. They're kind of a question mark, so we're going to see. Next up is Yonkers Brave, and this coach Vic Chiappa. Last year obviously was a struggle, going 0-9. I didn't get to speak to coach, but I know in my previous conversations with him, the big thing when coach talked about, and it's always a tough situation when you get all these schools, Yonkers schools, where it's a bunch of different schools combining into one program, is setting the culture, right? That was a big thing he emphasized with me, and that's going to practice, practicing hard, going to training hard, being coachable, taking accountability. Those are all the right things and right words that coach has said, and it's establishing that is a difficult thing to do and continues to be a fight. And when you can do those things, that's when the wins start to build, right? So I'm looking at some of these players coming back, and I'm interested to see who's kind of going to set that tone. It's not an overnight thing, right? It's got to start somewhere, right? And there are some kids here that I do think has that potential. The first one that pops out to me is Jaden Rush, defensive lineman and offensive lineman, the junior. To me, I really like his motor. He's very active. He's going after the football. A big thing, guys, make sure you guys make tape, right? I think it's so important. It's hard to get, full game tape to watch all of you. So tape is really important, but Jaden Rush to me popped off whenever I watched Yonkers Brave play. So he's a really important player. And who are the other ones going to join him? Is it a guy like Elix Perez, the senior, is running back? Edmund Kane, another senior. We also have Gregory Estagarabia. And I apologize if I mispronounce your name, but another offensive lineman with a solid size senior. So the big question marks for Yonkers Brave, I'm interested to see how they do this season. I do think they will be more competitive. Next team up is Mount Vernon. And Mount Vernon, coached by Mark Murray, thought they were a really strong team last year. They did end up going 4-6, but don't let the record kind of fool you. They made the playoffs, which I thought was a big step in the right direction. They lost to Mamaroneck in the quarters. And just think about this, right? The last 3 years, they went 10-14. The previous year before that, they were 0-7, right? So you can see putting together some wins these last couple of years. Coach has done a good job of getting things organized over there. But they have to replace a bunch of skill guys, right? They have to replace a bunch of skill guys who are pretty talented, including on the defense, the back end. So they have some guys that are going to have to fill in some big spots. Can they take that next step? To me, that's going to be the big question. It's about consistency, right? Can they take that next step instead of going kind of like a roller coaster up and down? Can they be consistent is going to be a huge thing. I do think the strength has the potential to be up front. And some of the players to watch, the first guy that steps out to me is Tidal Lee, the senior. He's kind of that linebacker safety role. Imagine get a higher role up on the offensive side. Very active player for them. Defensively, he was one of their leading tacklers. Fast, has a strong nose for the football, gets there very quickly. But I mentioned up front. And one of the guys, Kashai Francois, the junior, was a Frank's finest offensive lineman. Big boy at 6'2", 290 pounds, can really move people, has some of the nimble feet that he can also pull at times. But boy, I really like the potential that this young man showed and some of the stuff he showed on tape when you watch Mount Vernon, who had an offense that was pretty powerful running the football. He's one of the guys that are going to be huge for them. Another guy, Jahmai James, the senior, he's another offensive lineman. They're going to have to be, I think, reliant on them to kind of open things up, move bodies at the point of attack for them to be successful this year. And another guy, Edward Abadio Jr., who is a junior defensive end, another active football player for them. So I'm interested to see what Mount Vernon does. I think their strength is going to be up front for them this season. Next up, let's go to the other league, and we got to start with the section champs. That is Carmel, coached by Todd Kay. Back-to-back section titles, which has not been done since the Hayden, New Rochelle a few years back, right? So Carmel's really on unprecedented territory, being back-to-back section titles and now attempting to go for a three-peat. which hasn't been done since the New Rochelle, heyday. And the last 4 years, guys, 36-3 is their record. Just done a crazy amount of winning this year. And now they got some, like I mentioned at the start, some new coaches coming in, but some of them are familiar faces, right? And we also have a coach from Mahopac, Tom Donahoe, who was a longtime head coach over there. So they have, again, a lot of experience at the coaching position, coaching staff, with Todd Kay leading the charge. So, and the coaching is not going to be an issue. But can you see some slight changes? Yeah, they have to replace some guys, right? So offensively, 5 of 11 starters. On the offensive line, 2 out of 5. Quarterback, they also have to replace as well. Defensively, 5 out of 11 starters. They have to replace, and the big void is guys like Boland and Rosafort, right? So, you have to replace some of the other seniors who were big contributors to that section title team last year. And even the biggest ones are Boland and Rosafort, which are very difficult to replace. I don't think there's a one guy who can do it. It's got to be a group effort. And what I'm anticipating to see offensively and defensively, what I do like is the balance that Carmel's always had, where they can kind of morph their offense to their strengths. You can go into more run heavy. They can go into more passing, depending on the personnel. So I think if they can find more fullbacks and tight ends, they'll go into more heavy looks like you saw last year. If not, you could see some more spread stuff, but I think running the ball is the priority. Defensively, you had the number 1 defense last year. I don't think you're going to see some major changes. You'll probably see different language used from last year, or maybe some less internal things last year. But what I'm anticipating, a lot of outside stunts. So I'm expecting to see a lot of pressure being generated from the outside. But questions still remain on filling those voids. And some of the players to watch, again, Carmel's still bringing back a lot of talent. First thing is at the quarterback, right? It's such an important position. Christian Nunez and Brian McCory battling it out. Interested to see who kind of takes that position when it comes to the first game. Matt Risley, right? He was a Super 11 player. He was a Frank's finest linebacker and running back. He really is the brain trust of that defense and help getting things organized. And he also just has a really strong nose for the ball. He gets to the ball quickly, and he's a very strong tackler for this team and really a leader for this defense the last 2 years. We talk about the guys up front. Liam Forrester, he's a mountain of a man, another Frank's finest guy. Both on the offensive and defensive line, he's going to be a force. He's a huge dude, strong dude. Jaden Robles is another one that is really stout as a run blocker and defensive line. Before his injury last year, he was also a really strong two-way player for his team. Damian Santiago is another one, really become one of the best wide receivers in the game, and at safety, he's long, he's hard to run around, he's an athletic dude. So another really important two-way player, another Frank's finest. Tristan Werlew at the running back spot, probably playing strong safety or inside linebacker, not exactly sure, but one thing I know is he can run the football. So he was really strong for them running the ball last year, especially with the injuries that have come up. Another guy to mention, young guy, Thomas Connolly. I've heard a lot of things that he's really come onto the scene. He was coming from the JV. He's a junior, really good athlete, could be playing 2 ways, starting at corner, starting a wide receiver. Ryan Abel's another one. I talk about the DBs with Rosafort leaving. Ryan Abel last year, you saw the raw talent. I did, but coaching him, you saw the raw talent. I think he has a high ceiling as a cover man-to-man guy. We talk about the linebacker spot, and I do think they'll be strong at linebacker, but losing Jeremy Smith is a huge loss. But I do think Nico, would we call him, or Mel, I think he can help fill that void, and he can step into that inside linebacker spot. And another one is the defensive end spot, and I think they're vying for it right now. You got Hibbert, you got Tamba, and you got a transfer over from Mount Vernon and King Mercer, who super talented and super raw, right? So you're going to see who's filling that DNs. They also had PJ that graduated as well. How do they fill those DN roles? Who's filling in that free safety role, right? These are questions that loom, but Carmel's going to bring in some talent. I think Carmel is still going to be competitive. I think when they did a poll at Media Day on who the favorites are for AA, Carmel came in second behind Arlington. So the pressure is always there. That's what they've kind of established, and I think it's a good thing. You should always strive to be the best. So I'm interested to see what happens with Carmel. In my opinion, I still think they will be one of the league competitors for the section title. Let's go to the next team, and that's North Rockland. Coached by James Hickey, last year 5-5. They lost to Carmel in the semifinals, had a really big win versus East Fishkill in the quarters. Ended the season 5-5. I know they kind of talked that they were a little disappointed at how it ended. They do have to replace a bunch of guys as well, but I do like the talent coming back for North Rockland offensively. 3 out of 11 starters are coming back, none on the offensive line. They also have to replace their quarterback, so there is still a lot of roles to fill and positions to fill. Defensively, they bring back a little bit more. 5 out of 11 starters coming back on defense, and offensively, again, this is another year in their system. That's what the push coaches with better understanding of the system, and they think the offensive line definitely has to improve, right? So they don't replace any of the offensive linemen, but they feel this offensive line will be a little bit more detailed and fundamentally sound. Defensively, again, having to replace a bunch of guys. So to me, it's going to be huge. My take is this offensive line is the big question mark. If they want to compete with the teams like Carmel and Arlington, it's going to be up front. They got to hold up. So coach was confident in this offensive line. It might not be as big as they were last year, but they believe they will be stronger than they were last year. So that's a huge question mark to me. And they also have some kids transferring in. So it's almost like picking up free agents for North Rockland that transferred back into North Rockland. Some of the players to watch. First one to me is running back Gamey Savor, one of the most dynamic running backs in the class. Talked about him at Frank's Finest. Freddie Vasquez is another guy, very versatile guy for this team. He's a running back, H-back, wide receiver. Could be playing some linebacker as well, but he's somebody who you have to game plan for because he's such a vital part of their offense. I'm anticipating to see even a higher role. Ethan Farrar, he was a Frank's Finest cornerback. He also plays wide receiver. Another very talented football player. Jaden Harrison is a guy, a linebacker, running back, and tight end. He's one of the returning linebackers from last year. Going to be super important for this defense, who might have to carry things a little bit early as the offense gets going because they have so many kids to replace. Then we talk about this offense and defensive line. I mean, we have Derek Montpremier, and I apologize again for mispronouncing names. I'm not great with names, so I apologize ahead of time. Playing defensive end and offensive lineman, the senior. You have Rashad Plaisir, a senior, and again, real big-bodied kid. You have a transfer from Joel Herrera from Albertus Magnus. He was a Frank's Finest D lineman. Thought he was very disruptive. Going to have to be a two-way guy, both on the offensive line and defensive line. How about King St. Fleur, another transfer from Albertus Magnus? Thought he was a very strong defensive back, also plays wide receiver. He's a junior coming in. So really interested to see kind of this mixture of talent coming back and transfers. I think they're going to be super talented. The quarterback, Anthony Hamilton, that's going to be the big one. Coaches like the work that he's put in and is taking control. I think North Rockland might surprise some people. They're not, I don't think, highly viewed right now. It might be rough in the beginning, but North Rockland, I think, by the time season ends, is going to be pretty strong. Let's go to the next one, and that is John J. East Fishkill, coached by James Cancellari. And I got to tell you, John J. Fishkill, I don't like calling him a sleeper because John J. Fishkill has had a long history of winning, right? So to me, though, this feels, to me, in my opinion, feel like the biggest threat to Arlington and Carmel, in my opinion. And I think, and I'll make a bold prediction right now, I think they're going to win at least one playoff game this year. So they're going to at least make it to the semis. So hold me to it, guys. There's one of my bold predictions. But last year they went 6-2. They lost to North Rockland in the quarterfinals. This is obviously a strong program. The 19-11 the last 4 years, bringing back some talented guys, right? 6 of 11 starters on the offense, 3 out of 5 on the offensive line. They're bringing back their quarterback, which is always important, and probably one of the better players in the section in Feliciato. Defensively, 7 of 11 starters. So they're bringing back those guys with the experience. And when I talk about the biggest question mark, when I spoke to Coach, offensively they want to be more explosive. They were a strong running football team, but they want to be more explosive to kind of balance that as well. And defensively, they want to be better out on the edge. At times you saw, especially in the game against North Rockland, they were getting out on the edge and it really hurt them on some big-time plays. So the defensive end spot is definitely a big question mark for them. Guys trying to vie for that. When we talk about players to watch, Brady Feliciato is the first one that comes to mind. Quarterback, also played some defense. I mean, he had 1,900 total yards and over 25 touchdowns. He really is. He's my Frank's Finest quarterback this year for 1AA. He runs like a running back and off of play action. He was really strong throwing the football, and I'm very excited to see his growth to that next step, which is being a more well-rounded thrower, which I think he could definitely be. Noah Crouch is another one, running back and linebacker. He was Frank's Finest guy, going to be super important, active player on both sides of the ball. Really reliable running back and linebacker for them, and he's got to really be one of the better players for them to make that step. Another guy, linebacker and offensive lineman, Finn Vanderstuff, is going to have to be really important again. I think the linebacker core could be really strong, but he also has to lead on that offensive line, which is going to be super important if you want to compete versus guys like I mentioned, Harlington, if you want to compete versus like Carmel. That's going to be huge for them. Evan Rossi's another guy that Coach talked about, really liked his work. He's like that wide receiver running back role. James Berg is one of those guys at the defensive end spot, got some reps, has some nice size to him at 6'4", 215. Right, he's going to be one of those edge guys that are going to have to step up. And then there's some young guys, Nate Johnson, who's a big basketball guy, super fast, really excited sophomore, Gerald Burko, Caleb Clamser, Vinny Agalotti, and Cruz Kalani are some of the young players coming up from the JV that Coach was really excited about. This had a strong JV team. They think if the mixture of players come back with the JV could bode well for them. So that was John Jay's Fishkill. Very interested to see how that works out for them. Next team, let's talk about White Plains. Coached by Mike Lindbergh. 2022, they went 3-6. They didn't make the playoffs. They also had a lot of young guys playing. Offensively, they do bring back 6 of 11 starters, 3 out of the 5 on the offensive line. Are replacing their quarterback with the JV, with a young man from JV, Tyler Older. Defensively, 6 out of 11 starters are coming back. The big question mark to me is in this offensive line when I've spoken to Coach, right? They have to replace 2 starters, and last year they had 3 sophomores on the offensive line, right? So there's a lot of reliance on those young linemen coming back, taking that big jump, right? So you got to replace 2 starters, plus hoping those young offensive linemen can make that big jump. Is going to be huge for this team. And the players to watch starts at the quarterback. When you know White Plains offense, you need that quarterback who could be commanding of the team, get the ball out to where it needs to go. At the right spot. So the junior Tyler Older's got a lot on his plate. But some of the other guys, one guy I really like, I think their most consistent and best player, and that's Luke Brooks. He's outside linebacker and tight end, the senior, 6'1", 185 pounds. Very reliable. Coach talks about him. Another guy, 2 running backs, Nick Sexton, the junior. He's another solid athlete, 5'8", 165 pounds, also plays safety. And then Isaiah Thelamak. And again, I apologize if I mispronounce your name. He's another senior, but solid size kid, 5'11", 190 pounds. These guys are kind of like an underrated factor on this team who could make a big jump this year. And another thing Coach wanted me to mention, Joey Kittelstad. This is a senior, and he said he absolutely loves his energy that he's bringing to the team throughout the summer and at practice, and he deserves a shout-out, so I'm going to give you a shout-out. I love kids at practice giving that type of energy, making his teammates better. I think that's a huge compliment. All right, let's go to the next team, and that's Yonkers Forest, coached by Coach Fava. 2022, they were 3-7, didn't make the playoffs, but I'll tell you what, they were a tough out last year. Yonkers Forest was a tough out. They were very competitive. The record doesn't really show that, but I thought they were a really tough team, and they're going to have to replace some serious talent and production from their unit last year, especially on offense. 3 out of 11 starters coming back on offense, 1 out of 5 on the offensive line. They got to replace their dual quarterbacks that was really successful for them in Martinez and Olkers, at the quarterback spot. And I think they're going to, when I spoke to Coach, I'm going to continue that dual system quarterback. 3 out of 11 starters also on the defense are coming back. There's a lot of youth here, but offensively they want to definitely improve upon the offensive line. Was a big emphasis by Coach Did, and defensively tackling. Now some of the players to watch from Yonkers Forest, obviously got to start at the wide receivers, right? They have one of the best receivers, Angel Aquino, the senior, big play threat, take a top off the defense, was a Frank's finest wide receiver for us last year. But also another one, Jacob Henry, kind of overshadowed because of the other side, but he also had a strong year last year, over 400 yards receiving, and that 2 wide receiver system is pretty deadly from this team. Now, another thing up front, a guy named Ryan Powell, he's one of the returning starters on the offensive line, going to help lead that offensive line unit if they have a chance to go places. He's going to be really important. And another guy, a transfer from Stepinac, Corey Everett, who's a defensive lineman making the move now to linebacker and running back. Good size kid at 6 feet, and it's like, 230? I mean, this is a big boy who can move. They're very excited about the potential of this young man. But I'm looking at these quarterbacks, right? They run a dual quarterback system. Nazir Fields, John Valerio are going to be guys that are competing for that dual, who can make plays in this dual system. Interested to see that, and a couple outside linebackers too. This linebacker unit could be pretty darn strong. Ben Stevens, the senior, 6'1", 175 pounds, was very productive last year for them. And Jaden Benique is another one to keep an eye on for Yonkers Forest. All right, let's go to our last 2 teams. First one up, we got to talk about the section section finalist, but didn't end up winning, and that's Mamaroneck. Coach Anthony Vitti, coached by Coach Anthony Vitti. And last year, 9-1, they lost the section title to Carmel. Had a really strong year. And the last 2 years, they've been fantastic. 15-4 the last 2 years. So really strong coaching job and great job by the program these last couple of years from Mamaroneck. But boy, they have a lot of guys they have to replace. Offensively, 3 out of 11 starters. Good news is 3 guys on that offensive line are coming back, so they can try to rely on the trenches a little bit as they figure things out. They got to replace their quarterback, replace their top running back, replace a couple top receivers, right? So a lot of offensive power, and defensively also a lot of veterans, tough players. 2 out of 11 starters are coming back. So there's a lot of inexperience. But I do think they could have a pretty strong linebacking core coming back this year. And some of the players to watch for this unit, TJ Smith, he's the big one, right? Linebacker and running back. He was an outside linebacker, moved to inside linebacker. They love his activity. They think he can have a big year for them this year. Mike Barry Thous, who I did a video on as a defensive end, he's being moved to linebacker and also going to play an important role in the backfield as well. He's another guy, super talented junior, coming back this year at the linebacker spot. You see 2 linebackers right off the gate. You also have Henry Norman. He's a junior defensive end and tight end. They think he can have a breakout year this year, especially in the trenches. You have Henry Mackey, who was a starting linebacker for them last year. He was playing quarterback, so I don't know if he's going to be able to do both, but at the quarterback spot, he's competing for that quarterback role. Is super important in this spread offense. And then those guys up front, that's who I think they're going to really have to rely on as the season gets going. And it's going to be led by guys like Nick Lamagna and also Zach Shepard, right? So Zach Shepard, a big-time kicker. He's also going to be important on both sides of the offense and defensive line. Nick is going to have to lead that way. He was a Frank's finest offensive lineman. I love the toughness and grit and sturdiness he plays with on that offensive line as an internal guard. And last but not least, Ali Smeal is another one. Super fast wide receiver. He's actually going to be doing track at Colorado College next year, so interesting player there. And then finally, to wrap it all off, guys, let's talk about Ossining. Coached by Larry McRae. Last year, they were 4-5. This was another solid unit to me, another tough out. And they're unique. They're bringing back some talent. Like, they have 6 of 11 offensive starters coming back, 3 out of the 5 on the offensive line. They do have to replace their quarterback. They got 2 guys going at it, and Shaylin Jalen and Tommy McCormick kind of battling it out for the quarterback job. Defensively, 7 out of 11 starters. So to me, they're bringing back some experience and some talent here. Again, I mentioned 6 starters, 7 starters, 3 on the O-line, but a lot of inexperience at the quarterback spot. So the guys around the quarterback are really going to have to help elevate this spot. And some of the players to watch, Anthony LaFaro is one of them. He got hurt, but he was a talented football player. I like what I saw on tape. Anthony LaFaro, that running back and linebacker spot, tough, gritty football player. So to me, he's a big one. Aiden Moore, who was a Frank's finest at the defensive end spot. He's a junior, really explosive off the edge. This is a dynamic pass rusher who can attack the football. Really important player for them. Gio Jean-Pierre is another guy. He's now a multi-year player on the varsity. He's kind of an athlete where he can move at wide receiver, running back, make plays at both. He's another important guy out on the edge who can make some plays for you. And on that offensive and defensive line, he's got to be led by a guy, Greg Valentino. So this young man, the senior, is going to have to help lead the trenches there for Ossining if they want to compete. And it's going to be interesting. I think Ossining is going to be another tough out this year for the league. All right, guys, that was all the team previews. We appreciate you guys for tuning in. You know, again, love the footballs in the air. We got week 0 right around the corner. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is Frank checking out.